Hello ladies and gentlemen, Panzer here, and today we're taking a look at The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Now, this is a game that has been out for a little while now, and it's had a bit of a controversy around it regarding graphics and graphical downgrades, and this has actually been discussed on the recent podcast, so if you're interested in that discussion, go ahead and have a look there. Now then, so what is The Witcher 3? Well, it's a third-person RPG set in the Witcher universe, which is a very interesting place indeed. So, just before we begin, have a quick look at the options menu. I am using a controller for this, so if you see controller button prompts, that is the reason why. And it's just a matter of personal preference. The game does actually function fairly well on the mouse and keyboard as well, so if you want to use that, it's not too much of an issue. Right, okay, so we're going to have a look at the video options. Now, I am running this on a custom setup, so I have borderless window set up, I have Geralt with Hairworks, just to show that off, and most of the settings are on high. Now, bear in mind I'm using a GTX 970, not an SLI, it's a single card, and an i7 2600 with 16 gigs of RAM. So that is the setup that we're looking at for now, which I believe would be a fairly common setup now if you have a PC that is not older than about 1 year, or maybe 1.5 years, then that's probably the kind of machine that you would have now. Right. So let's continue.
This bard's tale begins near White Orchard, with my dear friend Geralt of Rivia seeking his lover of yore, the sorceress Yennefer. She'd eluded him for years, but now seemed just a few steps ahead.
Alright, so what you saw just then was one of the cutscenes that are in the game, and that actually happens in the loading screens. It's sort of to kind of hide the loading screens, I guess. But that one was a little bit short, so there was a bit of loading screen after that. Now, so this is The Witcher 3. It's not a bad looking game. This is at high settings, and you can see the detailing on the characters and the environment is, for the most part, pretty good. I will say, if you look very closely, yeah, right there, some of the plants are indeed flat. This is kind of to be expected, and I don't know if anybody ever expected anything to be that different. After all, this is an open world game, and that is bound to happen. So, bear in mind, the bigger the game is, the less likely they're going to put small detailing in fairly mundane objects. After all, these are non-interactable flowers that I'm walking through right now, but at least, you know, they react to movement. That's something, for the most part. This one appears to be completely non-interactive. Right, so we're here at what used to be a battleground. Well, it is still a battleground. This dog is going absolutely mental at the moment. And there appear to be, I think, necrophages in the distance, just at the edge of the view distance there. I don't know if you can actually see it on the video, but there are a couple much closer there. So those are your main enemy types. So we're going to go straight into it and show a bit of the combat. So I believe we need to draw our silver sword, actually, for this. Now, the frame rate normally runs at about 60 frames a second. It normally runs at that, but with Hairworks turned on, it is about... I lose about 10 frames a second. I will say that. Alright, here comes combat. Now, I'm locked onto one over there. Do you kind of want to switch to one a little bit closer? Targeting with a controller is fairly easy. Just tap in the right analog stick and you can switch targets with just a flick of the controller. So I'm going to go for this one. Now we can also counter and parry, so parry is like that. But if we time it just right, it's a counter attack, which is very nice. And then we can roll out of the way as well. So I'm going to go for a strong attack on this one, and mistimed it. And that is the combat. So it's over very, very quickly, but some of the more complex enemy types, I guess, do have a little bit more of a challenge to them as well. These standard little demons are not the most difficult thing to fight, but at the same time, they can be a big problem in large groups. So that's one thing to bear in mind there. And of course, there is the typical sort of open world RPG element of, well, you can loot just about everything, and it's hard not to become a loot hoarder, really. You can even loot the horses for meat, and all of this stuff is usable in crafting. There's a lot of crafting in this game. So we've seen combat, so now I'm going to show you a little bit more about what I'm talking about. So here we have the alchemy section where we can craft various items here for making potions and medicines and all sorts of other things. And then we have our crafting section where we can make different items. So here is a diagram. These are plans for items that you can find in the world, and then you go to a blacksmith to forge armor and weapons. So that's kind of the thing that you need to do. But gathering the components, at least you can actually check what you need before going to the blacksmith. So here for this particular jacket I need these items. So it uses our default armor as one of the components, and then it has leather and leather scraps, and then it needs wire. So that's one thing that we have to get is wire, which is a fairly common item, so we should have that pretty soon. And then of course there's tutorials and character bios and so forth, and of course bestiary for you to check out what enemies are there. And of course these little tooltips that pop up to let you know what's going on. Right, so I'm going to hop over to the inventory and have a look at what we've got over here. So there's Geralt in the corner there, and you can see straight up the stats that you actually need to worry about. So his damage per second with his silver swords are 212, and his damage per second steel sword is 69. Now the difference between the two is that the silver sword is mainly for fighting beasts such as demons, and the steel weapons are mainly for fighting human enemies such as guards and bandits and so forth. So here we have one item in our inventory, and that is the Rusty Novigrad Sword. It's one that we just picked up recently, and equipping this, it shows you immediately that we would lose 18 points of damage a second, or damage per hit. That is a base weapon damage, and then of course there's critical chance and anything else on top of that, like magical elements and potions and so forth. So very typical RPG stuff. But that's not entirely a bad thing, because after all, I do prefer the sort of familiar aspect of this. And junk is also not completely junk, which is great, because it's not simply vendor trash that you can go and throw away for coins. Some of these items can actually be dismantled into crafting components. So, for example, this vial might be made back into glass, which we can craft something with. And the same goes with this blunt axe, and this axe head could be dismantled into maybe metal ore of some sort that we might be able to make something else with. Even coins, there are multiple currencies in the game. The one that you can actually use is called crowns, but there are also orans and florins, and these are tradable for various for crowns at the Vivaldi Bank, which is in Novigrad. So there is a sort of currency exchange going on. So in this case, I believe the orans might be worth 1 crown, and the florins might be worth 3 crowns here. So I'm not entirely sure what the number means at this stage, but that's something that we can do. Right. Now, the map itself is very, very large. So we can actually just zoom out here and you can see the extent of the area that we are looking at right now. And of course, lots of things marked on the map right now too. So, and that's just White Orchard. There are other places like the Palace, Velen, Novigrad, and the Scullage Isles. These are all different places that we can visit as well. So just this area alone is already this large. So, of course, traveling around such a large area would require a lot of time. However, we can use our horse. So, just call our horse over. Where is he? Ah, there he is. Alright.
Reckon this ain't a good time to chat. Let's do what we've come for and
Let's go.
Alright, so moving around on a horseback the horse moves at a fairly slow pace, sort of trotting around like so. And then if we want to canter, we can hold A and move a little bit faster, and if we need to move even faster, we can gallop, which uses stamina. Now, there is a little trick with this as well. If you're on a road, and I don't believe there is a road nearby, and there might be one over here. We're just going to ignore this quest for the moment, and so I can show you this. Right, so there's a road here. So you notice my stamina isn't dropping as I gallop along the road. So traveling from place to place can be a little bit easier by simply moving along the road. And if I hold down A, I can even gallop doing this. He will just follow the path. So I only need to steer then when I need to change direction. So here he's actually gone the wrong way down the junction, but never mind. Right, let's head back that way. Alright, and there's one more thing that we have, is our Witcher sensors. Of course, we have Witcher powers as well that we can use in combat, something I forgot to show earlier, but for the most part they do help quite significantly. So, in this mode, with Witcher sensors on, we can actually see stuff highlighted in the world. Like over there you can see some yellows, and there's a bit of red, and the yellow, I believe, highlights stuff that you can interact with, so things that are lootable and so on. And red items are, I believe, critical items, things like mission items that you can interact with. So, there we are. We can examine that shield, and that will move the quest along. It's quite a nice little thing. It's very useful for picking out things like herbs and little chests hidden in corners that you can pick up stuff from. Very, very useful indeed. It doesn't really serve any purpose outside of the roaming around, so bear that in mind. It's not really used for anything else other than combat. If you want to find things, like in the distance you can actually see there's a little pulse over there, so something moving in the distance over there. So if you want to find, I believe that's a dog. Yeah. It enhances your sound as well, so you can hear things from much further away. So we can hear the dog sort of running around the grass over there. And if there are enemies, we can hear them from much further off. So that's something that we can actually do with that. And I like this, that when you deactivate it, the glows around the objects don't fade immediately. So if you want to just look around without this kind of camera effect going on, you can still see the items that you are looking for. So very, very useful indeed. I believe he just appeared. I'm standing on a body there.
No. Made the sun.
Now,
Can you smell Bastion, boy?
so I've talked about what the game has, and I like the look of it. I like a lot of things about this game. It's a very pretty game. It has a very nice combat system. The combat system does feel very engaging because you have to read the enemy more closely. There's very little indication for each enemy type when they're about to attack, so your timing and your awareness has to be up a lot more. A lot of people have said that yes, you can hack and slash your way through it by spamming an attack, and sometimes that doesn't always work. There are some enemy types that will be able to dodge you very effectively if you keep repeating the same attack again and again. Other times, there are some enemies that are a little bit less difficult, and they seem to fall for that sort of stuff very easily. So it varies depending on the enemy type. So we'll say, though, because I'm playing on the medium difficulty, that if you're somebody who's quite adept with hack and slashes and so on, you might actually You might want to turn the difficulty up somewhat, because it might get a little bit too easy for you. But of course, that's something you can do after playing I believe the start of the game, the first part of it. Just find some combat and you can probably try that out. But from what I've seen, a lot of people are playing on the second hardest, if not the hardest difficulty for this, just to have a bit of a challenge. I'm kind of in the middle, so I'm just playing with the normal difficulty, but it's entirely up to preference. Now, I will want to talk about something I don't like about this game. And that's the controls. I'm not a fan of the controls. Well, they seem to work reasonably well, and in fact it works very nicely on the keyboard. I prefer to use a controller, and the problem with the controller is that the movement is very... I won't say it's not responsive, it's a little bit too sensitive. Because right now I'm walking around, I'm barely pushing the controller forward, and I can push it all the way to 50%, and he's still walking. Any further than that, and he walks a little bit faster, and then suddenly he starts running. So if you're trying to quickly get to a spot to loot an item, it can get very difficult. Now this wouldn't be such a big problem if the context area for things weren't so small. In some cases, the location of your camera can affect the item that you are actually looking at and whether you can loot it. Right now it's showing this corpse, but if I sort of nudge him this way, it switches to this NPC over here. So it's very dependent on the way Geralt is actually facing. And this can be a problem if stuff is moving around you, especially that dog who seems to keep pushing me. In fact, if I don't move, he just keeps pushing me. And objects such as ladders become very hard to interact with because the context area is very small. Now, I'm not a fan of context-sensitive controls at all. I find that if you have, especially on a keyboard, if you have enough controls, then a game should make use of the extra buttons available. If it's optimized for a controller, then the context area needs to be much bigger than it is right now. And that just isn't the case right now. So when interacting with some objects such as ladders, you may find yourself sprinting right past it and falling off a ledge. This is doubly problematic when you're trying to loot an object and the sprint button on the controller is A, as is the interact button. So interacting with objects can cause you to run right past them because the timing required to hold down the sprint button is very, very, very short. So if there's no object to loot in that space, you tend to sprint right past it. So it can get very annoying. But it's the only thing that I can really find wrong with this game. There are occasional crashes in some areas, and there are bugs with for example, NPCs popping in if they're far away from the area that they need to be activated. And there are some issues with some of the AI as well. Like, this dog is going absolutely mental, because he's trying to follow his owner, and the owner's trying to follow me, so he just keeps walking into me. And Roach, your horse, also tends to do some very strange things, since he tries to follow you sometimes in town, and he runs into villagers and all that. And villagers have a very strange way of reacting to animals as well. I've seen villagers walk into the horse and then panic because they walked into a horse. It's comical to watch. It's not particularly game-breaking, but the crashes in some areas can be, especially with a couple of the new NVIDIA drivers as well. On some machines, they do cause crashes more often than others. And I did actually have a crash earlier when trying to capture this game, so there is that as well. So, performance in this game isn't bad. On most machines, at medium settings, you'll definitely hit 60 FPS. There isn't too much of a problem with that. But Hairworks is one that you might want to stay away from because it does cut out a lot of the frame rate. I've only gotten switched on for Geralt, and I'm already running at 45 frames a second, but I did want to kind of show it off a little bit. But there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Is it any good? The Witcher 3. It's... For a good RPG fan, look, it's a very good RPG, and there's a lot of dynamic options to choose as you progress throughout the story. I mean, the story writing, for the most part I've seen so far, is pretty good. And from what I've been hearing from others as well, it's exceptional at later stages, and there's even a little card game called Gwent to play. So there's a lot of depth in the actual game world itself. There's a lot more going on. But overall, it's a good-looking game. It even has dynamic weather. Like, this dust wasn't blowing around earlier when I got to this area, and it just sort of started. And there's a dynamic day and night cycle as well. It's a lot to this game that is just there. There's a lot of detail in it. So it is a very, very, very well put together game. Just be aware that you might need a more powerful PC to run it if you want to experience all of those graphical options. And of course, for those who are still naysaying about the graphical downgrade and all that, yes, there is a difference. There is definitely a difference, but it's still one of the best looking games out there right now, and as time goes on, well, the graphics may well improve. After all, this game is still going to be worked on, as far as I know, so you might even see this looking even better as time goes on. We shall see. But there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This has been Panzer taking a look at The Witcher 3, now available from GOG, or on Steam, or even Origin, for approximately $60 or your regional equivalent. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Stupid dog.